Sometime in the beginning of the 19th century, Thomas Jefferson allegedly wrote to his Secretary of State, "We have not heard from our ambassador in Spain for 2 years. If we do not hear from him this year, let us write him a letter." The world is a very different place today. One difference is that we diplomats, we have lost the exclusivity we once had. The world is not for a chosen few any longer. We're living in the age of mass traveling. We are living in the information age, where anyone with a few lari and the ability to read can enter an internet cafe and just thereby access the world and its immense flow of information. So what is really the added value of diplomats today? I think it's a relevant question. Well, diplomacy is about managing the relationships between states. It can be, among other things, hanging out in Spain for a few years, but it has a lot of other dimensions to it as well that I think are more close to ordinary citizens or all of us. It could be issues such as food safety, pollution, the threat of a global pandemic. It could be refugees or trade. At its most extreme, it's about life or death, about war or peace. If you check on Wikipedia and look up the word diplomat, you can read that it's described as the caricature of pinstriped men gliding through the world in a never-ending global cocktail party. And though I find that description oversimplistic and more than slightly derogatory, I do think it's an element of truth in it. When I went through diplomatic training in Sweden some 12 years ago, we were given a book. It was called the Diplomats Handbook, and it was unfortunately completely useless. In it, we could read what the invitation cards to tea parties should look like. And we could also read about the duties of a diplomat's spouse, largely always women, what they were. And, well, I should come clean here. I do owe one pinstripe suit. But I have so far never, ever hosted a tea party. I can't even recall that I've been invited to one, and I wish to believe that it is because my colleagues haven't really hosted any tea parties either. But I think that while some of this old-fashioned pinstriped suit kind of diplomacy might still be necessary today, I think, in essence, diplomacy needs to change in order to stay relevant. And why do I think that? Well, first, we have globalization. Everything is just going faster. Globalization is nothing new. We had it for millennia, I would say. We had Alexander the Great, and then came Genghis Khan. So the sort of globe has been shrinking over the millennia. But I think that the scope and the pace of it, it's just unprecedented, and it seems unrelenting. Second, we're also seeing a shift, a power shift, both between nations and within nations. We see it within nations. The Arab Spring is a perfect example of that. But also between nations, where some states are losing some of their international influence. Other states are emerging or re-emerging on the international arena. Thirdly, we also see fragmentation of power. The state as such is losing some of its power, and a lot of new players have taken stage. It could be global enterprises with a turnover just as big as Georgia's, or it could be media tycoons or traders or international non-governmental organizations. It could be terrorist groups. There are many examples. And I think all these actors, they are also showing to have a significant political role. I think also that if diplomacy failed to adapt to this environment, I think a lot is at stake. Weak diplomacy creates space for a system where the strongest have the strongest say, no matter what they say. We often talk about soft power. In the EU, we love to talk about the soft power, and I think it's important. Soft power is defined as the ability to get what you want through attraction and co-option. But in order for soft powers to have a say or to have a chance to get their voice heard, we really need skillful diplomacy, otherwise we'll be run over by the hard power players that are still out there. Weak diplomacy also creates space for military to take charge. We have seen that in Afghanistan over the last 10 years, how the military has taken, I'd almost say, the front lead in terms of peace building. A role that I think should be more of a diplomat's role, and I think the whole idea of having the military in lead of that is detrimental to the core and nature of that work. Weak diplomacy also creates space for even more problems, because when we fail to solve something, it's not like the problems go away. They tend to stay on there and just grow even more complicated for us diplomats and for politicians to return to at a later, often much more complex stage. So what does this mean for diplomacy? Well, I think that in order to address this changing world and sort of answer to these challenges or these threats, I think diplomacy will need to change. First, I think we need to be more where the action is. We need to shift the focus from commenting on events to really try to influence events where they matter most. And this, in today's globalized world, could be anywhere. Today, we need more people in Kabul, Karachi, Cairo than we need in Copenhagen. Much more is at stake in North Korea than in Norway. It is in places like this we will need the best and the brightest. And as a consequence of that, diplomatic life will have to become a little less cushy. It will mean fewer cocktails and more cold showers and power cuts. I also think it will mean that we have to think about what kind of people we are recruiting to our core. What price are we ready to pay? And what price are our governments sending us ready to pay in order to compensate us for maybe working far away from our loved ones and exposing ourselves to substantial security risks? I will return to the risk issue in just a moment. So, I served in Afghanistan for a few years ago. It was in 2004 to 2006, and I was at the time the only Swedish diplomat living in Afghanistan. And I think these 2 years very much has influenced my way of thinking of the world, and also my attitude or my idea about my role as a diplomat in it. In Afghanistan, I think something happened within me. I became more passionate about my job. At least that is what I think is what happened. And I think it's because I realized how much is really at stake. It was just there for me to see. It was right in my face. You had it was a staggering, heartbreaking poverty. It was the lack of security. It was the oppression of women. It was a forced marriages, it was the violence, it was the electricity cuts. I could make the list very long. It was just there, not only for me to see, but it was just not a way to get away from it. And therefore, I think it sort of really influenced me and made me realize or think about the limits and abilities of politics. When I lived in Kabul, I, as many others, I ended up in some sort of bubble, like an diplomats or expat bubble. And it was not because I wanted to, because I really tried to struggle back. But, well, first of all, it's not very easy as a Western woman to blend into daily life in Kabul. But it was also because, in a way, I think the physical wall that separated me from the Afghan society that I was sent out to interpret events in, it's sort of the physical wall in terms of concrete blocks, armor, it underscored the mental wall between me and Afghan society. I think this sort of tendency to end up in bubbles, in compounds far away from ordinary life is detrimental. I don't think it's good for our work. I think that even though the world is getting more dangerous, I think we need to be able to take risks, calculated risks, but risks nevertheless. I think we need to push back from excessive security arrangements. So that would be one thing. The second thing is that I think that we diplomats, we need to be more of specialists. Today, many foreign ministries, they hang on to the idea that diplomats should be able to work everywhere. We should be generalists. So there are times when Chinese speakers are sent off to serve in Latin America or so, and Spanish speakers move to Moscow. And I think, again, Afghanistan is a good example. I think we sent more than thousands of diplomats to Afghanistan over the last 10 years, and only a handful of these could speak Farsi or Pashto, the two official languages of Afghanistan. And how do we think we will really be able to understand what's going on there or influence events if we can't even understand what ordinary Afghans are saying? Thirdly, I think we as diplomats really need to be able to hold on to the longer perspective. In this fast-moving world of piecemeal information, we just have to be able to take the longer perspective and build or feed into our politicians something based on more than the Reuters, more than what the BBC has to say. We have to be able to be there before the TV teams come in, also to stay on the day the TV teams pack up and leave for the next war. In this complicated world, we just need that time. We need that time to come up with any meaningful ideas. And we need that time to build the networks necessary to really get the full picture and be able to understand how issues could be moved. And if I think back to my years in Afghanistan, I can actually only think of 2 or possibly 3 people that I met during these 2 years that had these 3 skills that were sort of in for the long run, and that knew the place and that were outside this bubble the rest of us tended to get bogged down in. And I give you an example, a guy called Thomas. He was a German diplomat, a great guy, really. He spoke Pashto, he spoke Farsi. He's been in and out of Afghanistan since the 80s. And and he really knew the place. He was traveling all over, and I was lucky to be able to travel with him a lot. And if I ever got to understand anything, I think it's much because the insights he shared with me. And if I still didn't get it, it was not his fault. Anyhow, so the fourth thing, though, I would like to stress that I think is needed is to strengthen our ability to build alliances. I represent Sweden, a mid-sized European country with a population of 9 million people. It doesn't matter how good we might be, and I personally wish to believe we are good. It doesn't matter how bright our ideas we have. If we fail to build alliances, we will not get our voice heard. And in the end, it is the impact that matters, not the moral upper hand, but the impact. And for that, alliances are just crucial. So, when I read the newspapers or watch the TV, it seemed to me that the world has never been in greater need of skillful diplomacy. But as I see it, it's not more of the same we need. It's more of something else. So I think we need a more resilient, a bolder, a more field-oriented, and a more of specialist kind of diplomatic corps that excels in building alliances. Thank you.